motorways turning into car parks, no medicines on the shelves, everyone eating tinned food, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. We've known that was going to happen for 2 years now. We've had that date, March 29th, 2019, in our heads as the date it was all going to go wrong, and then it didn't. It got pushed back. Hi, so this is me talking into a camera, which is something I'm trying to get used to. So there probably will be a few more vlog pieces on this channel for a while. Not replacing the poetry stuff exclusively, or the video essay stuff, or anything like that. But sometimes I do feel like there's stuff I want to say, and I don't really have it worked out in a really straightforward format, and there is, of course, the medium's tremendous hunger for content. You'll have noticed that I've been getting a little bit behind on the posting schedule lately, because sometimes some of the things that I have as ideas for stuff that I could put up there are kind of complicated, or if not complicated, they need a certain number of things to kind of fall right. They need a certain number of things to go according to plan. So the most obvious thing is a lot of the poetry videos. I need to have footage that I can use with those. And not everything will always work, you know. I didn't really have, I think, a good setup for the final version of Volumnia. Or the near final version of Volumnia. I have changed it slightly, but literally only changing a few bits of the tense for how it's going to go in the final part of Struggle Play. So that I don't think would have worked as well without the footage of the Nico Vederberg sculptures at Northumbria University. And so I sometimes thought it would just be nice to have something that I could put up on the channel just as a kind of weekly check-in, especially since I am getting more subscribers and more people do seem to be gradually watching the channel, which is nice. I recently noticed that the most popular video on my channel is the Theo Ehret lecture, which is really interesting. Because this is, as you'll have no doubt noticed looking around, primarily a poetry channel, but also a channel in which I sort of talk about various things that interest me and obsess me. And the main poetry project I've been working on for the past year, really since about November 2017, is Struggle Play, which is a show about being an agonophile. There'll be more stuff about that probably in later vlogs, because I do want to discuss the bizarre situation of being one, and which really is part of what Struggle Play is about. You know, it's a show about being attracted to violent women while also, as a trans woman, having to fear the violence of cis women, you know, which is a very real possibility that you have to factor in, despite what certain faded sports stars in the media have been putting about. It doesn't make you super strong to become a trans woman. Any trans woman who competes in any kind of sport has to have been on hormones for a minimum of 2 years, and that's testosterone blocking hormones and estrogen. And those kind of take away any natural advantage you might have. They really, you know, you become physically weaker, you find it harder to put on muscle mass. Bone density is actually affected, despite a number of things they say. It does actually make your bones more brittle. You're no longer as strong as you used to be physically, and that's a thing that you have to deal with. And there's actually a kind of power in that. There's actually a kind of power in saying, like, I might not be as strong as I was, but I'm still going to try. I'm still gonna, you know, try and put up a fight and everything, but you do have to deal with the fact that you are probably going to lose. You are not as strong as you used to be. And, you know, there are all kinds of other areas that actually being born, being assigned male at birth, and not accessing hormone treatment quickly enough does cause problems for you. So, for example, sometimes when I've been rolling, when I've been practicing stuff on the dummy, I have sometimes found that some things that I've observed that the likes of, say, Christy Etzold or similar people can do, I find really, really hard to do, because it turns out that, you know, my thighs can only really spread so far, and that's not meant in a sexual context, but I'm sure it can be taken as such. But what I mean is, you know, sometimes it's hard to get someone in a guard if you can't open your thighs as much, and that's something that's easier for cis women to do. You know, there are advantages to having a cis female body. There are advantages to having a body that you've never felt, that you weren't at home in, you know? And I think, you know, that psychological edge is as important as any kind of physical edge in stuff like that, in any kind of sport, really. So struggle play has partly been about that, and about kind of the different dynamic that you find yourself having to view things in once you realise that actually what you're doing is a lot more dangerous than you ever thought it would be, you know? I mean, there's a tension there. And so that was something that I wanted to explore in the show. And I really actually like the fact that a lot of people who come to this channel through having watched the Theo Eric video maybe aren't as aware of my other work, and are sort of like watching because they're kind of agonophiles themselves. They are people who share that particular interest of mine rather than necessarily my interest in lyrical filmmaking or poetry or the work of Patrick Kaler. And I don't mean that in a sort of patronising, oh, perhaps you'll learn these incredible recondite things. What I mean by that is it's nice to have people who are coming from a similar background as me, but not one where people are familiar with me primarily as a poet and primarily as a performer. Because kind of struggle play is as much for people like that as it is for people who are more familiar with my poetic work, you know? There's not a lot of stuff about us online. What stuff there is obviously kind of targeted to the fetish end of the market, which is understandable. But I feel like in some ways that actually cheapens us as well. Not in, you know, I don't want to like, you know, if you're on Session Girls and you're making money from it and everything, that is great. I'm not saying this in like any kind of, you know, swerfy sense. But I mean, I feel like if this was dudes, you know, like, it would be respected more, you know, you'd be able to go all Hemingway about it, and that's something I look at in struggle play as well, you know. There is a reaction that cis men have to female violence and to female struggle that is very, very patronising. And I don't actually think a lot of sort of genuine agonophiles have that, you know. I think it's much more complicated than that. It's not dismissive, you know. It's about admiring the power of women. It's about admiring the strength of women and admiring women's bodies in a different way than this kind of, you know, reducing people to a sylph-like waif type situation. I don't know if you can hear the hail that's hitting the windows as I'm reading this, but if you're wondering what that noise is, yeah, we have hail. I was actually planning to go out and do some photography today, with the camera. There's a new graffiti mural up on the corner of Heaton Road, near Ricky's corner shop. There was an Angel Mob mural there for quite a long time. I don't know if the new mural is by them. I think it might be by other people. It doesn't have any of the normal Angel Mob trademarks, but there's a new mural up, and I wanted to get a picture of that. And I noticed recently that there is some incredible concrete roofing near to where I live that I want to try and get some pictures of as well, because I love photographing concrete. Because I love, I think, you know, one of the things I've tried to do in Struggle Play is talk about liking, you know, bodies are powerful. Structures can be powerful, materials can be powerful as well, music can be powerful, art can be powerful, and, you know, I'm attracted to a lot of those things for the same reason. I love concrete because it's a very strong looking material, it's surprisingly sculpturally pliable, it takes light in all kinds of interesting ways, and also it's almost threatening architecture. You know, it's not Toy Town stuff, it's not McMansion stuff. Even a really simple, you know, concrete building has a threatening aspect to some degree, and a really, really well made one that's been made by someone who understands the structural qualities of concrete, can be immensely beautiful. So I wanted to go out and get some photos of these concrete roofs, so that's something I was thinking of doing, but alas, it has rained. Also, I did just have to go and get my gaserolin injection and get my bloods done, and I had forgotten how lightheaded that was going to make me. So if I seem a little bit ditzy on this and don't seem to be connecting the dots very well, that's why. So I talked a little bit about Struggle Play there and agonophilia, which is one of the things that I want to talk about, but as I say again, I want to make a more detailed video looking at that and thinking about it in context. I recently was reading a really interesting idea in Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, which I've been reading, and he mentions there is a philosopher who talks about the pleasure at being the cause, which they think is something that's important to play, and it's something that goes all the way back to infancy. And I have a few ideas kind of swirling around in my head about that. There's also a line in an article that was in the Baffler recently, which led me to another article on this idea called the digital sublime. The digital sublime is a really, really interesting concept in terms of computing and in terms of the internet. And it is essentially that the part of the internet that we see is like the tip of an iceberg. There is a lot of stuff we don't see that keeps everything running. And actually thinking about the amount of data that's required, it's almost impossible to kind of imagine, and actually to imagine something like that happening outside of our awareness. It has a quality of the Burkean sublime, which is a little bit different to, say, looking at a mountain or looking at a vast plain, but it does have that same feeling where you feel that everything that you know is a really, really smaller fraction of a bigger thing. And that in itself is an interesting idea. I might come back to that in something, because I do like the sublime as a philosophical aesthetic idea. You probably have grasped that. But the line that was interesting in agonophilia terms in this article was just a throwaway line, an explanation of why the sublime is so interesting to contemplate, which is the discovering that one can be overpowered and still survive brings a feeling of pleasure. And I mean, yeah, that's a really interesting philosophical take on it. So that was something I thought that I'd do. What else was I thinking of doing? I wanted to do something about possibility spaces, because Another thing that Struggle Play does is I finally got the ending of it right, I think, because the ending with the new version of Volumnia, with the very last word of the show being try, it ends in a possibility space. And this is something that has been really, really important to me in my work for a while now. Shotgun Wedding, the piece I did for Public Address in 2015, was based around the idea of the stuff I'd done prior to that. Howl of the Bantee, which was the show I took to the Edinburgh Festival in 2015, was very much a ranty spoken word show. And it very much started from the position that I had the answers, and I was going to tell you the answers, and you were going to listen. And there's a lot of value in that coming from a marginalised voice. Not that I'm a hugely marginalised voice, I am trans, but, you know, I'm trans, I'm white, I'm at least aspiring middle class, depending on how you slice the class enchilada. Do you slice an enchilada? Probably you don't. I mean, that would be weird. That would be really weird. I mean, that would just... Why would you slice an enchilada? But anyway, yeah, so... I've gone off on... sorry, my mind is going and just thinking about enchiladas now. I need to get back on top of this. So, yeah, depending on how you actually slice things class-wise, I am pretty solidly working class, but from a part of the working class shading into middle class. Like, my parents both had middle class jobs, as people would see it, but they didn't really own the means of production in their jobs, and I certainly don't. I mean, I suppose in a sense I own the means of production right now because I own this camera. But, you know, how you think about class is something that's really interesting in sort of the current milieu, and it's something that I don't propose to get bogged down in on this channel. How did I wind up talking about that anyway? Possibility spaces. Ending on try. Yeah, so I was talking about how marginalised I am or am not. And I don't want to get bogged down in all that, but I think there was value to taking that approach in my early work, or at least my early post-trans work. If you can ever describe anything as post-trans work. I mean, I'm sure if I went back and looked at some of my really genuinely early work, there would be like really obvious stuff in there where I'd be going, oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense now. But, because that's the trans experience. You go back through your life and you're like, oh yeah, that, looking back on that now, that makes a lot more sense in context. Yeah, But yeah, so I thought there was value in doing that, but there wasn't value in that for me, because I was getting bored with it. You know, I don't want to be someone who's constantly like, here's the truth, here's the answer. You know, the ranting prophet style of poetry is good. And there are people who do that way better than me, so I don't have to. You know, there are like people who are way better at doing that than I am now. So I thought maybe I should do something else. And what I got interested in was work that asked questions. So Shotgun Wedding was very much about, you know, asking questions, you know, almost in its actual structure and its form. And Struggle Play is less about asking questions than it is about going up to an audience and being vulnerable in front of them and actually showing them that vulnerability. I mean, this is potentially very humiliating subject matter. This is potentially stuff that, you know, could very easily be seen as a negative. And in a way, the show and the ending of the show is me saying, look, you know, this is it. And you can destroy me if you want, but I'd really rather you didn't. I'd really rather you paid attention to this and thought about it, maybe not the same way that I think about it, but along the same lines, the same sort of philosophical areas. If you look at agonophilia as something that is an encounter with the philosophical sublime, it makes a lot more sense. And it situates it as part of a continuum. And if you think about it in terms of the way that we create ritualized systems and structures of violent spectacle as a way of controlling real violence and controlling our fear of real violence and allowing the violence to happen in a safe context, then you can see a continuity between more acceptable combat spectacles and the agonophilia variety. So, there's that. And I just thought the ending of the play, with the fact that it ends in this possibility space, in this moment at the end of Volumnia, that word try, that is something I'm really interested in. I think possibility spaces are a lot more fun to be in than impossibility spaces. And I think one of the interesting things, actually, about being in the UK at present, politically, is it does feel in a funny way that we are actually in a possibility space again. Because think about it. We have had over 2 years now, since the Article 50 thing was announced, of knowing with absolute certainty that we were going to be out of the EU, definitely, crashing out, no deal Brexit, motorways turning into car parks, no medicines on the shelves, everyone eating tinned food, blah, 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 all the rest of it. We've known that was going to happen for 2 years now. We've had that date, March 29th, 2019, in our heads as the date it was all going to go wrong. And then it didn't. It got pushed back. And I suspect that's probably going to keep happening for a bit. I think we're probably going to have some kind of... I actually think it's probably going to wind up having a general election. And at that point, Article 50 will have to be basically, to allow that to happen, it will have to be revoked, or it will have to be extended for a long time. Remember, we can potentially do this. No one has used Article 50 before. There is no precedent for this. So we are in interesting times in that sense in itself. Interesting times, obviously, in the cliched Chinese sense as well as... But actually, I do think these are just genuinely more interesting times for us now, because suddenly that certainty is gone. And you can actually see in the way that people are reacting to it that I think some people have an idea of what the new situation is going to be, even if they wouldn't openly accept it and openly say it. So, for example, if you look at the pro-Brexit rally in London and you look at the speech that Tommy 10 Names gave on that march, what is it? Miranda Yaxley Lennon, Stephanie Davis Molyneux. What's his name again? I can't remember. Tommy Monaghan? No, that's not it. No, what was it? Tony Robinson. That's the guy. Yeah. No, wait, he was Baldrick. Yeah, that guy. Poncing about on stage in a badly fitting t-shirt, advertising his own brand. Don't wear your band's t-shirt at the gig, mate. Never do that. It's a rule. It's a code. But shouting himself hoarse. But if you actually look at what he was saying, what was interesting about what he was saying was he was doing the stab in the back myth thing. Now, this is the thing that fascists always do. They like to say that the people have been stabbed in the back by them. And, we all know who them is in fascist, in the fascist mindset. But, they do like to use colourful terms. They like to use globalists, let's say, rather than what they actually mean. But yeah, so they try to claim that the people have been stabbed in the back by them, and that was exactly what he was doing. He's like, they're taking your Brexit away. And, that's not... Organising like that is not going to help him achieve mainstream political success. But it does help in classic fascist street organising. It helps with the classic fascist strategy, which is to attract a hardcore of really, depressed, dejected people by selling them a myth, selling them a lie that, they've been cheated. ever get the feeling you've been cheated, to quote that guy who advertises butter. But yeah, so he's already resorting to the stab in the back myth, so he thinks it's over. He thinks it's game over. He wouldn't be using that kind of rhetoric if he actually thought there was still a chance of doing things. I mean, I don't want to credit the man with too much intelligence. Clearly, he is not a greatly gifted man in that regard, or he might have thought he could probably take some vocal zone before giving that speech, or it might have occurred to him that he was speaking into a microphone, and therefore one of the lovely things about speaking into a microphone is you don't need to shout. But, yeah, not a smart man, but smart enough to know that the way things are going, it's a receding possibility. This tremendously apocalyptic, awful thing that we thought was going to happen, it's probably not going to happen now. Things probably aren't going to be great. I imagine the deal we'll end up with will probably be worse than the one we have now. But some people will accept that because, it means we've left. And some people will accept it because it's not as bad as a no-deal Brexit, and that's what'll happen. There'll be a compromise. No one will be happy with it, because that's how democracy works. At the end of the day, no one ever gets everything that they want. And so the Nazis and the fascists will prey on the people who are really, really pissed off about it, the way they always do, and they'll make little groupuscules that they can, foment trouble with, and there'll probably be a little heightened civil unrest, and there'll probably be, things are still a bit, tense now. We had naked protesters in the Commons last night, although, fantastically, that was Extinction Rebellion, rather than anything to do with Brexit, thank God, because that's the other thing. People are bored with Brexit, and people are increasingly realising that actually it doesn't solve any problems. The problems that we have are still going to be here after Brexit. Brexit is not going to get rid of any of them. Stopping Brexit is not going to get rid of them either. We still have far too many people living in poverty. We still have, the NHS is stretched. It's not getting funded. The bits that are getting funded are being privatised. Because that's how the Tories do things. We have a climate emergency that we have to deal with, and we can't deal with that if we're wasting time thinking about Brexit. There are big problems with crime. There are big problems with, housing. People need housing. Education is hemorrhaging teachers because it's just been so damaged by the Tories and by years of neoliberal ideology under Labour before it. So people are starting to realise that, with New Labour before it, I should say, so people are starting to realise that we actually have big problems that Brexit is not going to solve, and that stopping Brexit is not going to solve, and that actually constantly focusing on Brexit doesn't solve because it distracts attention. And I think most people just want to, save face. They want to say they've got something. So it won't be like staying in the EU, but it won't be as bad as the no-deal Brexit. But what that means, the thing I want you to think about, is that idea that there was a date, a specific date, when we thought everything was going to get really bad. And then it happened, and it wasn't. Planes didn't fall out of the sky, did they? On December 31st. 1999. Now, I'm not comparing the Brexit situation exactly to the Millennium Bug situation, partly because one of the reasons the Millennium Bug wasn't such a problem is that a lot of diligent work was done behind the scenes to prepare for it and to make sure that it wouldn't cause issues. But think about that moment. There was, and I think there was also a general cultural sense in 1999 as well, which was 20 years ago. And you know how things come back around in culture on cycles. 1999 was 20 years ago. The Matrix first came out 20 years ago. That's going through a bit of a critical reassessment at the minute. There are a couple of videos on YouTube that I think are interesting in that regard. There's the new Peter Coffin one, and there's the Let's Talk About Stuff video, which is not about the Matrix yet, but is about Bound, because what she's doing is reassessing the entire Wachowski's canon, which I think I'm really, really psyched for watching those. I think that's a really cool idea. But you know, that sense of possibility that we had at the end of 1999 and going into 2000, I remember Warren Ellis's column about weird ghost year 2000, because the millennium didn't actually really start until 2001, but everyone had kind of decided by fiat that 2000 was millennium year. There was suddenly a sense of a lot more possibility in the air. And I think that's what Brexit not having happened creates, you know, or at least a no-deal Brexit not having happened creates. If you look at, I mean, I think culturally, there's a lot of really, really interesting stuff coming out. Shout out to the new Comet is Coming album, which I just thought was fucking brilliant. I've been listening to it pretty much on repeat for the past couple of days since hearing it on Saturday, because it is just so good. So the video stopped there because my my camera has some kind of weird limitations on how long it'll film for. It doesn't seem to be because the memory card is too full. Yeah, so I think I've said most of what I wanted to say there, actually. The struggle play, agonophilia stuff, the stuff about the show, the stuff about, you know, subscriber limits, not limits, numbers going up on the channel. Also, the stuff about Brexit as a possibility space. There was other stuff I wanted to talk about as well, but as I've said, the main agonophilia stuff will probably be something I will do in another video essay piece, which will probably be similar to the Theo Errett piece, in that it won't all be just me talking into a camera, but there might be some bits of that in there. I think this has helped in terms of getting more used to that. And yeah, there was something else I wanted to talk about as well, but I'm going to keep that for another video. So as far as things go, like I say, I'll put some links in the description to the Peter Coffin Matrix video and to the Let's Talk About Stuff Bound review, which is awesome. This is the bit I hate doing, because it's always really, really fake. And if I can let myself off with not doing it in a video on any kind of aesthetic grounds, like it looks cooler if you just fade out, I do try to avoid doing this. But yeah, so if you like this, you could say that you like it by pressing the thumbs up button. I would like it if you subscribe, if you're not already subscribing to the channel. That would be really, really lovely. And I do love it when people share this stuff. I like seeing that people have shared my work elsewhere, and it can sometimes be interesting to see where people share them. But mainly, just thank you for bearing with me during this weird random ramble. And I will speak to you again sometime soon. Thank you. Bye. This is really awkward because I haven't actually switched the camera off yet. So I'm kind of just waffling while I try to remember where, because what I've done is I've put the, okay, I can see the button now. So actually, genuinely, really, this time, bye.